Now, how long have you been dancing, and do you primarily lead or follow?
I am a follow primarily. I have been dancing since I was 5. I've been swing dancing since I was 18, and then I started blues dancing shortly after that. So um, I guess this kind of gives away my age, but I've been swing dancing for about 14 years and blues dancing for about 11 to 12 years.
Nice. Now, why do you dance, and why did you start?
This is a very difficult question to answer. I guess the simplest way to put it is that it feels good, right? So I think that most people that choose dance in any form enjoy the sensation that it brings to the body. Um, I started because my mother put me in a ballet class. I am still doing it because of that, like body feel good sensation, but then also from an intellectual perspective, it offers a challenge, learning something new, learning something that is both cognitive and kinesthetic, um, and then the expressive component of it as well is very satisfying.
So, going off of that, how does dancing make you feel?
I really think that the question is the answer to this is that it does make me feel. And so, how it makes me feel could be any number of things, right? Obviously, there's happy, there's satisfied, there's frustrated. Sometimes there's like there's that sense of sharing you can get from dancing with others. But I really think that what makes the dance valuable is that it does cause you to feel.
Now, how would you describe blues dancing?
So I'm going to give you an academic answer to this question.
Awesome.
So blues dancing is a collection of African American vernacular dances. These dances originated early in the 20th century in juke joints, rap parties, and they tend to be there's some kind of underlying principles. So you have a grounded athletic posture, which is because of the African roots. It's a dance, kind of African sensibility of movement. Um, and really, where that comes from is that the it's kind of almost a spiritual connection to the earth, right? And so that is maintained throughout blues dancing, and then you have the polyrhythm of it within the body, within the music, within yourself and your partner. You have the physical shapes of asymmetry and isolation. The partnership is usually close in close embrace or close position. And then the pulse, of course. So the body is continually responding to the beat in the music. And again, that comes back to African sensibilities and movement. And then, so that's my academic answer. But then, as my personal answer, honestly, if someone asks me, so what is blues dancing? Honestly, the first thing I usually say is, it's this thing I do. So it's that thing that I do. And I think that it has become kind of a part of my identity as a person. So that's like my personal side of things.
Now, where do you dance, and how do your experiences with blues dancing vary from one space to another?
Um, so where I dance is in Chicago, and then throughout the country. And I think that this space is extremely relevant to the mood of the dance. So, and the space can also be the sound. So the space, literally, how much space do you have? Um, you can have a sense of an intimate space even in a large room, depending on how the room is done. So you have how intimate is the space, size notwithstanding, how literally intimate is the space with regards to size. Um, and then how does it feel? What is the sound? Is it overwhelming sound? Is there a lot of chit chat? Is it a space that you're comfortable with? Is it a new space? And then is the space designed to be, is it a performance space? Is the space a stage? Right? So that doesn't actually answer your question. That just describes spaces. So I would say when you have a space in which you're on display, obviously that's going to change your delivery of your dance. You'll be less introverted. You'll care more about your audience. And being on display can literally be in a competition or performance, or if it's an event that I'm running. right? Like I kind of feel like all blues shout is like that until Sunday night. So I think that when you put it all together, each space has a mood. And then, like a song, that mood affects me. Um, and it will either mesh well with my own mood or it might be a challenge. And then I can kind of choose to take on that challenge or not. And if I choose to not take on the challenge, then that would be a day for singing and chatting.
Awesome.
I feel like that was a long answer to a short question.
No, I really like what you said.
Okay.
It was great. Now, has blues dancing changed since you first began, and in what ways?
All right, so I've been doing this a really long time, right? Not as long as others, but I've been around since the beginning of the revival. And I think that the growth that has happened in the blues scene has been steadily positive as far as the quality, the authenticity of the dance that we are doing now. And so you may be amused to know that my first blues dance lesson was from a West Coast dancer. Right, so you know that the reason that's funny is because West Coast has no pulse. West Coast can be done to any song, and it's not directly related to the song. West Coast is about movement, and doing cool things with your partner. So things have changed a lot since then. For me, I think so. I think the turning point for me was probably 2004, and then the 2005 Cheap Thrills All Blues Weekend in St. Louis. So that was the first year that we had instructors who really had their lessons, their instruction in blues dancing come from people who were like Savoy dancers in Harlem, or from their family members, again, kind of from the era. Like they were learning this from people who did the dances when they were developed. So those people are Damon Stone and Mike Faltasak, actually. Mike isn't really so much in the scene anymore, but I think you were probably also talking to Damon for this study, and then everybody will probably mention him. So in 2005, we had, I think, the biggest and best Cheap Thrills, that, our best blues event that had ever really happened. And that's when we all just kind of had this, come to Jesus moment where we realized we were doing it wrong. And we were standing flat between our feet. There was no pulse. There was no weight shift. The partnership was very one way, So since then, so Blue Shout grew out of Cheap Thrills, and part of the goal of Blue Shout is not just to be a leader. Like, we want to be an innovator, and that's part of it. But it's really about maintaining the respect for our origins while encouraging individuals to find their own voice, or encouraging us as a group, as an entire subculture, to have a voice. So it's not so much that you have to do just exactly what was done back in 1932, but that the aesthetic is there, the sensibility is there, and we all obviously bring our own experiences. But the best thing about that, is that that's what blues is, right? You bring your experience to the table. So where we are now, I think, is mind blowing. Every year, I look at our dancers, and I'm just amazed at what they're bringing to the floor. So it has changed a lot in 10 years, a whole lot, and I think it's all wonderful, and I'm crazy excited to see what happens in the next 10 years, assuming that I haven't moved to Tahiti.
Now, how does dancing with different partners impact your experience?
I think, it makes it diverse, right? So dancing is a conversation. So every time you talk to a different person, you have a different conversation. I am someone who enjoys learning about others, and so this is just another way for me to understand people, right, and to get to know a person. When it's a person who you already know, it's a nice perspective, and perhaps whatever they're having, what kind of day they're having, but then also you start to kind of develop in the same way that someone who you are really close friends with, you can finish their sentences. The same kind of situation happens with dancing. So you have your close relationships and partnerships, but then you have your new people, especially when you travel. And this is the best thing about traveling is that you get to experience, experience something new. Um, and then you learn about other people, right? But then, of course, when you interact with someone else, it can potentially help you learn about who you are. And you hear their perspective on a song, and you're like, I never thought of that, but that's really excellent. And I feel this way now, So I think it really parallels any other kind of communication with humans.
Now, in your opinion, do men and women experience dancing differently? Why?
I don't love this question. So I think it's difficult to make a generalization about men and women. I realize that this is about gender for sure, but I feel like this particular question, so the experience of a person is very individual and it's very unique to each person. I think the only generalizations that you can make in this is with the fact that leads are stereotypically male and follows are stereotypically female. So you have that then a lead-follow dynamic, and so in that way, you could assess men as leads and women as follows, but then you'd also want to consider men as follows and women as leads. So, I mean, that's a whole other thing, and I think we're going to talk a little bit in a bit about the lead-follow dynamic as well. So maybe I'll stop there with that question.
Sounds fine. In fact, that's the next question is lead-follow dynamics. So do you feel that either role sets up any particular gender or power dynamic with a partner?
I feel like this is a little bit of a chicken and egg question, right? So were leads set to be men because men were already considered leaders of society, right? And partner dancing has been, I don't know how old partner dancing is, but hundreds of years old, hundreds and hundreds. So I think it would be very interesting to look at partner dancing styles over time and when, like, because I know they used to be taught, like you knew this dance and everything was choreographed, right? So at what point improv came into it, this I don't know. And I'm suddenly like, let's research that. I think that since follows are historically female, and women are historically the submissive partner, the passive partner, in many things about life in general and relationships, or at least on the outside. Surely we don't know what goes on behind people's front doors. But so I think that plays into it, although now we're definitely seeing a lot of challenges to that dynamic. I'd certainly encourage all of my students to consider swapping roles after they feel confident in one, and then if a female type person comes up and says, I want to lead this, there's not even a hesitation anymore, I think, from many, many instructors. And then even on the social floor, I think it's really starting to change. I worry about the persistence of the power dynamic with lead and follow, but the point is that you have a lead and a follow. And that is, it's one of the boundaries that we choose to work within when we do partner dancing. Whether that is a male follow and a female lead or whatever, the dynamic needs to still exist, or else you're not partner dancing. You're dancing next to each other, not with each other. So I don't care who's doing it, as long as there is that conversation. And of course, as you know, one of the best things about blues is that it is a conversation versus instructions, right? So I think we have a kind of unique dance here in comparison to other styles of partner dancing.
Yes, and earlier you mentioned perhaps a change in that. You're talking about blues dancing as in the early revival stages. It's more of a one-way kind of dynamic.
This is a long time ago, but yes, that's what I feel like. I felt like it was more directly lead to follow. But again, this may be better answered by a more experienced dancer than I am, because I was really new. And it may be that I just wasn't that good of a dancer. I always felt like I was hijacking, when I tried to do my thing or add to something. And that may have been because I was really actually hijacking because I was a bad dancer. And it could be because I didn't understand some nuances, right? Or it could be that that's what everybody thought, or it could be regional. So I don't know if I have a good answer to that.
Okay. Now, how would you describe traditional femininity or masculinity?
Traditional, I guess it would depend on the culture, right? So whatever is stereotypically assigned to men in a culture or women in a culture as far as behaviors, looks, roles, like social roles, relationship roles.
Now, how would you describe perhaps feminine or masculine movement?
So movement. Okay, I can give you an academic answer to this, right?
Sure.
So feminine movement is stereotypically assumed to be softer in shape, less aggressive. So, for example, like a feminine way of holding the arm would be with a curve, or a masculine way of holding the arm would be with a straight arm, right? So, I would argue that that reflects stereotypes about the human body and how it should be as well, right? So, women should be curvy and men should be strong. Some of the postures, so women might choose to have a more introverted posture, whereas men would have a more extroverted posture. Stance. Women are told to keep their legs together, and men are told to take a strong stance and not be knocked over. So there's also kind of a little bit of that aggressiveness for masculine dancing, whereas more shyness for feminine movement. Obviously, these are stereotypes, but it's, I think, interesting to assess them.
Yeah, speaking of which, do you feel like there are any pros or cons to teaching movement or teaching masculine and feminine movement?
I think it's how you do it. So I do teach masculine and feminine movement. Interestingly enough, any solo class that I've ever taught has been 95% or higher female. And I haven't figured out why the boys are scared. But I think that in any solo movement, so I tend to teach this within a solo context, right? The benefit of that is, more than anything else, is learning about your body and learning where your boundaries are, learning what you can do with your body, learning new ways to say the same thing or a new thing to say. So if you give the structure of what is stereotypical for women, what is stereotypical for men in this country, one, it gives a format. And so for people who are not dancers or people who have not been dancing since they're 5, it's really nice to have a framework within which to work. And it's really easy to see the shapes and how they change with muscle tone. That's another thing I probably should mention before. So I like to teach this class in a mirror because it really shows the dancer literally what happens in their body when they adopt a different mindset. And I think that is very helpful, especially, I would say, for like the intermediate level dancer, to understand their bodies, to understand movement, and to be able to make educated choices based on what they hear in the music, based on what their partner is doing. So I definitely teach it, and I found it to work for my students. The goal, obviously, is that because these days there aren't as many social pressures or whatever, so you can choose what you want to be and how you want to present yourself. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, do you feel you embody any feminine or masculine characteristics when you dance?
This is a very interesting question. I think that as a general expression of myself, like if I'm just social dancing, no. I think I'm pretty like even keel. I'm not particularly masculine. I'm not particularly feminine. And I think that is because I, as a person, am not particularly masculine or feminine. And I think that is because I have characteristics of both. So I'm vocal. I'm very tall. I occasionally get into arm wrestling matches. So, I have some kind of stereotypically masculine traits, but then, my day job is a very feminine profession, and I wear dresses, so, and I'm definitely a lady. So, I like to think that I do a decent job of blending expectations for masculinity and femininity, and I'd like to think that that comes out in my regular dancing. That said, I am aware that what I wear does change. So I'm glad you asked about shoes. Really glad you asked about that. So we'll get to that, right? So um, I and I think this works for a lot of people, is that when we dress ourselves, we are partly obviously portraying a side of ourselves to others because that's literally on the outside. But we also, many people dress themselves for themselves, right? So if I choose to wear a dress, I'm mostly choosing that because I want to feel particularly feminine that day, um, or share that aspect of myself with somebody. Um, so so kind of skipping ahead. So like when in a performance, you can choose to put that on. But then you can choose to make a social dance a performance too. And I think people who play with gender, I think really do that well. Like they choose a persona for the day. And I see that much, much more these days than I used to. So that's cool too.
Now, going off of the clothing idea,
Mm-hmm.
like in what ways do you express your gender identity while dancing? I feel like you already touched on a few of these. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how do your movements, clothing choices, and/or character reflect your gender?
Right. Um, I guess I don't this I don't know that this question really works for me because I don't feel like I bring a gender identity to my dance most of the time, unless I'm performing. And I have toyed with the idea of performing a completely masculine style, but it's really hard to do. And for me, the quality of the performance greatly outstrips the benefit of exercising my desire to try on a masculine hat. And so in that experiment, I tried this with a couple other of ladies, and we failed. It just did not work. And I think it was just that we were really losing quality. So as far as what my gender identity is I identify as a girl, a female, a woman, um, and but I don't think about it too much. I don't really bring it to dancing. I just dance.
Cool. Now, what shoes do you wear when you dance, and what makes you choose different types
Mm-hmm.
of shoes?
So this is also maybe a chicken and egg question. So women historically have worn heels for probably at least the last 100 years, maybe 150 years when going out. So the dance was developed with women wearing heels. Um, so that kind of colors my perspective a little bit. I find that when I wear flats, I am not as good of a follow. So I wear heels almost exclusively. And logistically, like maybe kinesthetically, I think that has to do with the fact that the heel pops your weight forward just a little bit onto the ball of your foot automatically. So you don't have to think about it. So it's already there. And as a follow, it makes it possible for you to be more responsive. And it's almost ironic that the reason you're more responsive is because you're less stable, right? So you have just a little bit less foot to stand on, literally. So it's just an interesting situation, that you are just slightly off balance, just a tiny bit. And certainly the more experienced dancer you are, the better you're going to be with less. You're going to be able to work with less. So the heel gives you that extra, a little inch forward. I cannot lead as well in heels. And I think that is because of the opposite. The lead, well, a follow is expected to be responsive and like on the ball, literally and figuratively. So I'm totally laughing at myself right now. Then you have your lead, the support, the grounding. So you want to have maybe a flatter shoe, but men's dress shoes, which is kind of generally what we encourage men to wear, do have a little bit of a heel as well. So again, I don't know if the dance was designed because that's the shoes that folks were wearing, like if it just kind of evolved that way, or if the dance would exist even if the shoes are not there, if it would still feel the same way. And I don't know that it would. I know that often when it gets to be late, we kick off our shoes and dance in our bare feet. And I find, even in my bare feet, that I tend to keep my heels up a little bit. So I don't know. And I think it's also an interesting phenomenon, the fact that especially women kick off their shoes at the end of the night and dance in their bare feet, and that's going to completely change the way you dance. Mm-hmm. So you should ask Tim and Julie about feet.
Yes, I've taken some of those classes. Now, do you feel you accentuate your femininity or masculinity for competition or performance? And feel free to talk about particular
Right.
instances.
So as I mentioned before, I tried to put together a choreography with two other ladies where we were super masculine, and it didn't happen. It just, theoretically, it was a good idea. The three of us, interestingly enough, were very different. So I was probably the most middle ground. One of us already was someone who kind of plays with gender and chooses to adopt more masculine characteristics on purpose. And then the third lady is super feminine, super feminine all the time. Soft movement, very feminine face, long flowing hair. So it was just kind of interesting to see how none of us can make this work out. And as far as other performances, so other things that I've done in the recent past, so like the Grit Grinders Girlies routine at Blue Shot 2012, where we did the revival of the 1999 routine that broke everyone's brains in 1999 at ALHC. That was exceptionally feminine, right? So the song was feminine. We wore kind of like little chemises, and the movement was feminine in shape, in delivery. The song was as a woman's story. But I would argue that, like when I think about that performance, when I think about watching the video, what we looked like from the outside, there was plenty of strength in it. And something that I always worry about with regards to kind of stereotypical femininity is like this sense of passivity or weakness. And I think that the blues genre and jazz as well really allows for a person who is choosing to present themselves as feminine to be that and be a strong person. And so I really, really appreciate that. And I feel like that particular routine really portrays that. The same goes for Mojo aristocracy routines. So I'm thinking specifically of the crawling king snake routine, which didn't get as much circulation as the one that came before it that I can't remember. But that routine was sung. The song was sung by a man, very growly, very masculine song, and we had kind of a avant-garde kind of shape to a lot of our movement. And so I think gender, in a way, kind of almost disappeared a little bit in that particular piece. And I don't know that we did that on purpose. But again, when I think about the video, like when I think about seeing it from the outside, I kind of have this asexualness to it, even though the song is extremely sexual. It's Crawling King Snake. We all know what that means. So the performance itself was, it was artistic, so and we never really talked about it. Like we never really had maybe like a concerted effort to consider gender or consider our presentation. We did wear dresses, but we also had no shoes on. So which kind of brings back to maybe that changed our shape, that changed the way that we danced. I'm thinking about other things that I've done recently. I guess the other thing is, so as far as competition, okay, so I think my most recent, most recognized competition was at Lindy Focus. I was wearing a dress, I was wearing heels. But when I come to a competition, so my best competitions are Jack and Jills. And when you come into a Jack and Jill, for me, I try to come in pretty much as a blank slate and let the music inform me and let the partnership inform me. So no, I don't think in that case that I have a particular assertion of femininity or masculinity, although it could happen to me based on the situation, like the scene, right, or the song. And then again, thinking about that one from the outside, I don't think there was anything particularly masculine or feminine. I think it was very much just me, which is why I like Jack and Jills, right? So I get to just do my thing. I think that's all I have on that one.
Awesome. Now, what do you think about female dancers accentuating femininity or masculinity for competition or performance?
I think this is hard to do. And I mean, now that I've experienced it for myself, I really struggle with the idea of how difficult it is. And when I have seen women choose, a masculine character, what I keep thinking about is that we're not actors. I think it takes an exceptional actor to put on for performance a character or persona that really has no foundation in who you are. So because a performance and even a competition in my mind should have a piece of you, right? So like, honestly, this makes me think of So You Think You Can Dance. Like, they are always telling their dancers, you have to share who you are. You have to show us you. You have to allow yourself to be vulnerable on the stage. So a real performer, a good performer, is going to be able to still express who they are, even if they're putting on a character, or especially because of putting on a character. And I just feel like right now in our community, I haven't seen a ton of women able to really adopt a masculine persona and have it really work. And I don't think it's necessarily be always like that. I think there's definitely room for growth. So I personally failed at it. I've seen some performances that I felt like could have gone a little bit better. I have seen a couple real good hits, like Julie Brown this past year did. I can't remember what it's called.
Blue Midnight.
Yes, thank you, Blue Midnight. And this is why I think it worked for Julie, is that she made wise choices. She was not stereotypically masculine the whole time. She was not even necessarily stereotypically masculine, right? So she was still Julie Brown. And she's, the song was very masculine. The situation is kind of a stereotypical masculine, like leaving a bar, like really intoxicated and kind of angry at the world. But she still was, I think, true to her aesthetic, right? And so I feel like she's an example of it being done well. So I have another question for you, though, and that is, why are you not asking me about male dancers accentuating feminine characteristics?
Well, there's no good
reason. Is
reason.
that because I am a female? Are you asking the guys that?
I am asking the guys that. But if you want to talk about it, go for it.
I just think it's interesting that because I would have an opinion about that, or maybe it's just me because I have an opinion about everything. So this question made me think about that, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. Which made me think of Dexter and Heriberto's performance this past year at Blue Shout, because this is the thing. So when women adopt masculine characteristics, do we get sexier? I don't know that the general consensus is that we do. Maybe we do. Like if you think about characters like who's Sherlock Holmes's woman, the one that he's like madly in love with. Oh gosh. Anyway, so she's a dominatrix, and she's got these very stereotypically masculine personality characteristics, and that makes her sexier. But when men adopt feminine characteristics, like a softer shape or more roll in the body, everyone suddenly is just completely aroused by that. Which is what happened at Blue Shout. The energy in the room was ridiculous. And I think that Dexter and Heriberto really adopted a lot of kind of stereotypically feminine shapes. But again, with the balance of, similar to Julie, but with a different effect, is that they were still very seriously themselves, right? And so the movement was at home in their body. So maybe that's a concept that I'm thinking of, is that the movement still needs to be at home in your body. And for them, it was. And I think that's because they are extremely self-aware. They're physically self-aware. They're both extremely experienced dancers. And they worked really hard. I know that they did. They really studied their movement for that routine. And they challenged themselves, and they challenged all of us. So I also obviously have an opinion on the other side of that. Clothing-wise, they didn't really make any changes. They wore the same kind of stuff they always wear, in comparison to Julie, who, although Julie is really artistic, she wears all sorts of stuff. So I'm interested in the fact that I think it would be harder for a woman adopting stereotypically masculine characteristics to be automatically seen as sexier. But I think the reverse of that may be true. And I think it has a lot to do with delivery and what the song is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, do you think that age is a factor in how a person might express their gender on the dance floor?
Yeah, so I also answered this for both men and women. I think age has so many confounding factors in a dancing scene that it's hard to pull out what is gender and what is age. So I see men as older men automatically being seen as creepy, like they are creepy until otherwise proven. And that I feel like is one of my privileges as an instructor and as a scene leader is that I get to vet people first. So a lot of times they come through my classes. Or I had a private lesson with an older guy the other day, retired guy, wants to learn how to dance. Super nice, super cool dude. So now I can say, hey friends, here's this guy, you should totally dance with him. Or else he would probably have to go through the long vetting process of having to go around and ask girls to dance or boys to dance or whatever, and potentially risk getting rejected based on the fact that he's an older guy. Older women, on the other hand, I feel like they're not at risk of the creepy factor quite as automatically. They're just, I feel like, ignored. Maybe they're seen as frail or washed up or something, but I see older women having a really hard time. And then I guess that also plays into the lead-follow dynamic where those women, especially those women, have to go out and ask for dances. They're not going to be not going to be getting asked to dance. But I think really, like, again, it's not as much of, I think, a gender issue as what is their intent, right? So when you come to a dance at 22, how much are you interested in the dance and how much are you interested in finding a romantic partner? And like, how much is that on the table? When you're 32, maybe that's changing. When you're 52, it could be different, but might not be, right? So people in second or third relationships will sometimes see the dance scene as a way to negotiate that as well. And there's absolutely no reason to not expect that angle from a person of any age. But when you have a change in maturity level, there's an awareness of that. Whereas I would argue that the what I call teeny boppers, so the 18 to 25 crowd, are probably not really as self-aware that that is part of their intent, or that their intent won't be misconstrued by a 50-year-old because that 50-year-old is a grown-up and is mature enough to understand that this 22-year-old is just for dancing. So I think a lot of it really is about intent. And I think that the romantic nature of some dancing comes into that as well. And then the other component of this is a self-expression component. So again, you have, I would argue that the teeny boppers maybe are not as aware of their self-expression, or they are desperately in need of self-expression because they haven't, because they've been in school, or they're just starting to understand who they are. And so how you see yourself is going to affect how you see who you dance with. You know, the image in your mind that you're trying to be versus portray, right? So who you are trying to actually be has an ideal partner across from you. And so that's going to change from person to person. I'm trying to think if I have any other thoughts on that. I think over time, the age boundaries soften a little bit, but I don't think they ever go away. Like when you look at a crowd of a social dance, you have, your teeny boppers are here, I just had a kid and they're with the babysitters are here, and then you have your older folks tend to kind of group together. So I don't know. I don't know that that's ever going to go away. And I guess I just feel like older men and older women, their issues are just different. I don't know that it's worse for one or the other as far as being able to get a dance or asking someone to dance, other than perhaps it's harder for an older woman because of the dynamic of LeadFallow.
Now, do you have any final thoughts on anything we talked about or didn't talk about you wanted to bring up?
I don't think I actually do. Isn't that strange? I really feel like this is a very valuable conversation, so kudos to you for taking this on.